Maya Thornton's knees hit the marble.
Your sister
before she
comes
knew
first.
why. The room spun, the chandelier smeared into gold, her throat locked shut around a fist. 200 guests stood frozen in silken suits, champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. No one moved. Behind the wall of bodies, her mother's voice cut through, sharp, terrified, and aimed at someone else. "Camille, baby, look at me! Stay with me!" Maya's fingers clawed the tablecloth. White orchids crashed down with her as she hit the floor of the Thornton family's 40th anniversary gala. Her vision tunneled. The last clear thing she saw was her mother, Evelyn Thornton, stepping straight over her shaking body without a glance, rushing toward Camille, who stood 10 feet away, perfectly fine, dabbing her eyes because the toast had made her a little emotional. Then 4 words, cold and final, carved themselves into Maya's soul before the dark took her. "Your sister comes first." If you're watching this and something about that line just cut through you, comment right now where you're watching from tonight, hit subscribe, and give this video a like before you keep going, because where this story is about to take you, you will not want to miss a second of it. Maya Thornton was 34 years old, the elder of Evelyn and the late Robert Thornton's 2 daughters, and for as long as she could remember, she had been the shadow standing just behind her younger sister's spotlight. Camille was 31, radiant, magnetic, the kind of woman photographers begged to shoot for free. Maya was the one who balanced the family's real estate holdings, who sat up until 3 a.m. 3 years ago, reworking the numbers on the Thornton Foundation so it wouldn't collapse after their father's death. Maya kept the machine running. Camille was the machine's favourite child. Nobody in that ballroom knew that 20 minutes before she collapsed, Maya had eaten exactly 1 bite of the seared salmon canapé from the silver tray a waiter in a black vest had pressed into her hand with unusual insistence. Nobody knew that the same waiter had vanished from the event before the ambulance arrived. And nobody, not even Maya, gasping on a gurney 40 minutes later, understood yet that this was not the first time someone in her family had been made to disappear quietly from a room while everyone's attention was fixed somewhere else. The paramedics said later that if she'd gone into anaphylactic shock 4 minutes later than she did, with her mother's household staff finally noticing and calling for help, Maya Thornton would not have made it to the hospital alive. She survived. Barely. And when she opened her eyes in a private room at Piedmont Hospital, the first face she saw wasn't her mother's. It was Desmond, the family's longtime driver, a broad, quiet man who had worked for the Thorntons 22 years and who was, without question, more loyal to Maya than anyone who shared her blood. "She hasn't come yet, Miss Maya," Desmond said gently, seeing the question form in her eyes before she could speak it. "Miss Camille's resting at home. Your mother's with her." Maya turned her face to the window so Desmond wouldn't see what that did to her. Here's where the story slows down, because you need to understand something before it speeds back up. The Thornton family wasn't just wealthy. They were an institution, 3 generations of black excellence in a city that had tried in 100 different ways across 100 years to make sure a family like theirs never got the chance to exist. Maya's grandmother, Odessa Thornton, had built a funeral home empire out of a single storefront in 1961 and turned it into a real estate and insurance dynasty worth over $200 million by the time she passed. That legacy sat on Maya's shoulders every single day. And somehow, despite carrying it, despite being the daughter who showed up to every board meeting, who signed every check, who buried her father alone in a hospital hallway while Camille was on a photo shoot in Turks and Caicos. Despite all of it, Maya had never once heard her mother say she was proud of her. She had heard "your sister comes first" more times than she could count. At 16, when she'd won a statewide debate championship the same weekend, Camille had a dance recital, and Evelyn chose the recital. At 22, when Maya graduated summa cum laude from Spelman, and her mother left the ceremony early because Camille had a small emergency, a cancelled brunch reservation. At 29, at her father's funeral, when Maya, drowning in grief and responsibility, asked her mother to sit with her for 5 minutes, and Evelyn had said gently but firmly, "Camille needs me more right now, baby. You're strong. You've always been strong." Strong. That word had become a cage. Being strong meant being forgettable. Being strong meant nobody worried whether you were breaking because you'd already decided a long time ago to never let them see it. 2 days after the gala, Evelyn finally came to the hospital. She wore a soft grey cashmere set and carried a bouquet of white orchids, the same flowers Maya had dragged off the table as she fell. Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead, sat at the edge of the bed, and said the words Maya had waited her whole life to hear in some form. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting me." Maya's chest tightened. For one absurd, hopeful second, she thought her mother was finally going to apologize. "Your sister is sick," Evelyn said instead. "She has been for almost a year. That's why I ran to her that night. I thought, God forgive me, I thought it was happening again, right there in front of everyone. If you feel something shifting in your chest right now, go ahead and drop a comment telling me how this story is making you feel. And if it's hitting you emotionally already, hit that like button because we are just getting started." Maya sat frozen, waiting for the rest, because there is always a rest. Evelyn explained in broken, careful sentences that Camille had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that attacked her nervous system in sudden, violent episodes. Episodes that could look, to someone standing across a crowded room, exactly like a woman about to collapse. Evelyn had been managing it quietly for months, terrified that if word got out, it would destroy the fragile trust the Thornton Foundation still held with its donors. Terrified that if Camille's illness became public, it would become another weapon for the people who'd spent decades waiting for a reason to say the Thorntons didn't deserve what they'd built. It was, on its surface, an explanation that made a kind of terrible sense. It also explained nothing. It didn't explain 16. It didn't explain 22. It didn't explain the funeral. Maya asked her mother very quietly, why? If this was truly about protecting Camille from a medical crisis, she had never once in 34 years made Maya feel like she mattered just as much when there was no crisis at all. Evelyn didn't answer that question. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap, and said only, "There are things about this family I haven't told either of you. I thought I had more time." Then her mother's phone rang, and Evelyn's face changed in a way Maya had seen only once before, the night her father died. She answered, listened for 11 seconds, and left the hospital room without another word, without an explanation, without so much as touching Maya's hand goodbye. "Your sister comes first." Except this time, Maya realized, watching the door swing shut, it wasn't really about Camille at all. Something else was moving beneath the surface of this family, something old, and it had just resurfaced. Maya discharged herself against medical advice the next morning. She went, not to her mother's estate in Buckhead, but to the Thornton Foundation offices downtown, where she still had a badge that opened every door in the building, including the one to the archive room in the basement that nobody had touched in years. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She only knew that a woman doesn't leave her daughter's hospital bed mid-sentence for a phone call unless the person on the other end knows something that terrifies her. It took Maya 4 hours, sitting on the cold floor between file cabinets, to find it. A manila folder, unmarked, wedged behind 20 years of tax documents, containing a single sealed letter addressed not to Evelyn, not to Robert, but to Odessa Thornton, dated 11 years before Maya was born. She broke the seal with shaking hands. The letter was from a woman named Ruth Ann Carver, and it named a child, a daughter. Born in 1979, 3 years before Evelyn Thornton married Robert. A daughter Evelyn had given up in a closed adoption, quietly, before the Thorntons became the Thorntons, before Odessa's empire, before Buckhead, before any of it. Ruth Ann Carver's letter to Odessa wasn't asking for money. It was warning her. It said the birth mother's family, Evelyn's people from a small town outside Macon, had never accepted the adoption and had spent decades quietly trying to locate the child, believing under an old, half-remembered piece of family folklore that a firstborn daughter given away carried a debt that would eventually come due on whoever raised the family after her. A curse, Ruth Ann called it, that the old women back home still spoke of in hushed voices. The first child leaves, and the family pays for it in the child who comes last. Maya read it 3 times before the shape of it fully landed in her chest. Camille wasn't the baby in that letter. Camille was born in 1995, 16 years after it. But somewhere out there, older than either of them, was a woman who had every legal and biological claim to being the true firstborn Thornton daughter. A woman Evelyn had spent 47 years pretending never existed, and a woman whose sudden reappearance, Maya now understood with a chill crawling up her spine, might be exactly what that phone call had been about. If a chill just ran through you the way it ran through Maya, comment the word family below so I know you're still with me. Because we're about to go somewhere I promise you did not see coming. Maya drove straight to Camille's condo that night, letter in hand, and found her sister not resting from illness but standing in the kitchen with dried tear tracks on her face and an open laptop showing an email from a DNA testing service. Camille had taken the test 6 months earlier, quietly, after years of feeling like something in their family history didn't add up. After their mother's strange behaviour every time an old photograph from before 1982 surfaced, after Evelyn's refusal to ever discuss her own childhood in Macon. The results had come back that week. There was a half-sibling match. A woman named Denise, 52 years old, living 40 minutes outside Atlanta, who had reached out to Evelyn first, not knowing Evelyn was her birth mother's married name. And Evelyn, in a panic, had spent the last several days trying to buy Denise's silence with money. She quietly moved through a shell account, terrified that if the truth came out, it would unravel not just her marriage's memory and her mother-in-law's legacy, but the entire foundation Odessa had built on the story of an unbroken, respectable Thornton bloodline. This is where everything Maya thought she understood about her childhood cracked wide open. Because the phone call at the hospital, the one that made Evelyn abandon her daughter mid-sentence, hadn't been about Camille's illness at all. It had been Denise calling Evelyn directly for the first time, saying she was done waiting, done being paid to stay quiet, and that she was coming to the 50th anniversary gala being planned for the Thornton Foundation in 3 weeks to introduce herself to the family in front of every donor, every board member, every camera in the room, unless Evelyn told the truth herself first, on her own terms. And your sister comes first. That phrase that had haunted Maya since childhood, Maya realised now had never once been about choosing Camille over her. It was older than both of them. It was the exact language, word for word, from Ruth Ann Carver's letter, the old superstition about the debt owed to a firstborn daughter given away. Evelyn had been saying it all those years, not as a preference, but as a kind of guilty, superstitious apology. A woman terrified that if she didn't perform devotion to the daughter she'd kept, some invisible ledger would come collecting through the daughters she raised. She hadn't been choosing Camille over Maya. She had been trying, badly and cruelly, and without ever explaining herself, to outrun a debt she believed her whole family owed to a woman none of them had ever met. If this story is affecting you right now, take a second and comment your honest thoughts. And like this video if you're feeling this the way I think you are. Because the truth Maya and Camille uncover next is the part of this story nobody in that family saw coming. The two sisters sat across from each other at Camille's kitchen table until 3 a.m, piecing together a childhood that suddenly made a different, sadder kind of sense. Every slight Maya had absorbed as proof she wasn't loved enough had actually been the residue of their mother's private terror. A woman so consumed by guilt over the daughter she gave away that she couldn't stop performing sacrifice for the daughter she'd kept closest, all while starving the daughter who reminded her, without either of them ever knowing why, of her own strength, her own younger self, the girl who had once been strong enough to survive giving up a child and building an empire anyway. It didn't excuse 34 years of feeling invisible. Camille said that out loud, gripping Maya's hand across the table, tears in her eyes. It doesn't make it okay, Maya. None of this makes what she did to you okay. I know, Maya said, and for the first time in her life she let herself cry in front of her sister without apologising for it. The gala was 3 weeks away. Evelyn had a choice to make, and so did her daughters. Maya could have let the secret stay buried, could have let her mother keep bribing a stranger into silence, while the family's carefully built legacy stood on a lie. Instead, she called Desmond that same night and asked him to drive her to her mother's house at dawn. She found Evelyn Thornton sitting alone in the dark of the sunroom where Robert used to read the paper every morning. Still in the grey cashmere from the hospital, looking every one of her 61 years, for the first time Maya could remember. "I know about Denise," Maya said. "I know about the letter. I know what your sister comes first really meant all these years." Evelyn's hands began to shake, and then for the first time since Maya was a child, her mother didn't deflect, didn't retreat, didn't reach for Camille as a shield. She simply broke, decades of guarded silence collapsing all at once, and told her daughter everything. Being 17 and terrified in a small Georgia town. The pressure from her own mother to give the baby up so she could marry into a family with a future. The promise she made to herself that she would spend the rest of her life proving she deserved the life she chose instead. And the quiet, corrosive fear that had followed her into every room for 47 years, whispering that the price for that choice would eventually come due. "I let that fear turn me into someone who hurt you," Evelyn said, reaching for Maya's hand and holding it like it might disappear. "I am so sorry. You were never the price. You were never anything but mine." Before you get to how this ends, subscribe if stories like this one, full of buried secrets, family loyalty, and twists you don't see coming, are exactly what you come here for, and share this with someone who needs to hear tonight's lesson. The Thornton Foundation Gala went forward 3 weeks later, but not the way Evelyn had planned it. Standing at the podium in front of 400 guests, with Maya on one side of her and Camille on the other, Evelyn Thornton told the truth about the daughter she'd given up nearly 5 decades earlier, and introduced Denise Carver to the family and the city as exactly what she was, her firstborn daughter, welcomed at last, out of the shadows her mother's fear had kept her in. There were gasps. There was a scandal that lived in Atlanta society pages for exactly 9 days, and then slowly something else took its place. A family, larger and more honest than it had ever been, sitting down together at a table that finally had room for all of them. Maya Thornton learned something that year that she carries with her still, something she has said out loud in every interview since. Every time someone asks how she found the strength to keep the foundation running through the storm that followed, she says it slowly, the way you say something you paid a great deal to understand. The people who love us imperfectly are not always choosing against us. Sometimes they are drowning in a debt only they can see, paying it in currency we never agreed to spend. It does not undo the hurt. It does not make the years of silence disappear. But it means the door back to each other is rarely as closed as it looks from the outside, if somebody is finally brave enough to knock. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me, putting it together, subscribe, share it with someone who's carrying an old wound in their own family, and tell me in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking with you tonight. Because stories like Maya's aren't really about the Thorntons at all. They're about every one of us waiting for someone to finally choose us out loud.